most for being here. We're so happy to have you with us. Super exciting. Yeah, this is really cool. So, um, as I mentioned, like most of us are going to keep muted all the time just so it kind of prevents feedback. I'll be monitoring to make sure we don't get Zoom bombed because those things are a thing that happens now. I mean, I kind of hope that happens at work, but it never does. And we're just so grateful that you came. This is super cool. We decided to start this about 5 weeks ago, just because we realized that inclusion in the arts is important all the time anyway, but what happens during a pandemic, right? Like, how do we, one, keep our momentum, but also how do we push this further in the future? And for inclusive, we're always looking to try to get things into, keeping ahead of the curve, right? But how does this change things for us? So we're grateful to have you, Gary, and thank you again for being here. And I will turn it over to our interviewers for more.
Thank you. The pleasure is mine.
Thank you again for joining us, Gary. We will get to inclusion, but we would be remiss if we didn't ask you, having one of the best writers on with us, we'd be remiss if we didn't ask you, so when did you start writing and where does your inspiration come from?
I started reading early. And when I was 10, my mother took me to the public library. She took all of us to the public library regularly. And one Saturday, I picked up Ray Bradbury's short story collection, R is for Rocket. I read it. I loved the beauty of the language in it and decided I wanted to be a writer. And so I started trying to write then. When I was 10, I started trying to sell when I was 13. And I sold my first story when I was 18. But I didn't sell my second until I was 27. Go figure.
And what are you learning? What did you learn throughout that process of trying to sell your writing or get your writing published?
I used to go to the library quite regularly, and after I decided to write, I started getting books on how to write. What was it called? The Writer's Handbook. By A.S. Burak, which was, his daughter Sylvia continued it years later, but that talked about how to write, how to use verbs correctly. One thing I do when I do writing workshops is I talk about the power of the verb as the key word in the sentence. And I learned that, again, when I was 10, reading that book. It said in a short story, the words you choose for action give your reader a picture. For example, the man walked through the door is kind of vague. He shouldered his way through the door. He stomped through the door. He burst through the door. He slid through the door. He slipped past the door. He threw open the door. All those verbs give your reader a completely different picture. So rather than just use the simplest word, I learned to use the word that had the best picture, the simplest word that had the best picture, because you start trying to get fancy, and you never try to get too fancy with your writing, because then you'll say, oh, a good word for walk is perambulate. Most people don't know that word. So he perambulated along the sidewalk. Nobody pays it. What is he talking about? He strolled, he staggered, he limped, he strutted, he marched. He stormed. All those things give better pictures if people understand. So fancy words are kind of no-nos.
So using that process of having more descriptive verbs, is that where your playwriting started?
No, the playwriting came later. I started by trying to write short stories and sell them to magazines. I did write a Christmas play for my church when I was 16, and it was not a manger story. It was not with the wise men and the angels and the shepherds and the cows and whatever. And it was kind of a depressing family drama about a little girl who was dying of leukemia, and they expected her to die before Christmas, but she didn't. And so my Sunday school put it on, and it was a big hit. And a lot of people said, boy, we expected the usual, with shepherds and at the Shepherd's Crook and the Star and so forth. And it was a different kind of play. And then I did not write a play for a long, long time. I wrote lots of stories. I have a novel that came out in 2009, but I finished it in 2000. I started trying to sell it. I had an agent in New York City who was trying to market the novel. And I ended up getting a major bite from HarperCollins. And the editor who wanted the book asked for changes. And it just so happened it was the end of the semester. And this was 2002. It was the end of the semester. And he said, it was what, maybe first week of May, the semester was wrapping up. Do you think you can make these changes in 6 weeks? Yes, I can. The semester is over. So I made all the changes, got the book in 4 or 5 weeks. I was early. And then I waited to hear what happened. And a few weeks passed. And it was probably late July. And I hadn't heard anything. So I called my agent. And she said, well, I haven't heard from him. Let me call over there and see what's happening. Turns out he'd been let go. His successor wasn't interested in my book. So she said, do you want to do another draft? And I had done like 5 drafts. I said, no, not unless somebody is willing to bite and say, hey, we want the book, we need these changes, then I'll do it. So I was really angry, frustrated. And I went around the corner to one of my 2 favorite bookstores. Talking Leaves was one, and then the other was Queen City Comics, because I read lots of graphic novels and comic books along with other things. And Emil Novak at Queen City had said, hey, we're doing, my theater group is doing a play. We want to do a stage version of The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. Are you interested in writing it? And I thought, well, I'm not doing anything else. Why not? So he gave me a DVD of the movie. I watched it 3 times, made some notes, and I drafted the play. It took me about 2 weeks. I gave it to them, and they did it that fall, and they really liked it. And I thought, well, wow. I had an idea for a play, but I wasn't sure I could write it. And that play was Matter of Intent, which was a courtroom drama. After my divorce back then, for a time, I dated a lawyer. And she said, I hate courtroom dramas. I always get the law wrong. And so I was determined to get the law right. So I read legal briefs. I studied courtroom procedure. I had software that enabled me to act as a trial attorney. And if I didn't frame my questions properly, I lost the game. So I spent probably 6 months doing research on that, and then 3 or 4 months writing it. And Matter of Intent was a success at Uchima Theater. It won the Edgar Award for Mystery Writers of America. It was later done in London, England. And a company in India based a film on it. And I was wondering, they asked for the rights, and I sold them because my sewer had broken and I needed the money. So I thought, well, this is a courtroom drama about a black maid being charged with murder in 1960. And it was about murder and a trial across class lines. So I thought, what are they going to do with it in India? And they turned it into The State versus Malti Mahasky. And it was then a drama about murder across caste lines. So it transliterated reasonably well. So that was a successful play. So I thought, well, maybe I should have been writing plays all along. So I started writing plays. I've gone back and forth between plays and short stories and plays and novels ever since.
So when you see, or when you're involved in a production with theater, seeing that you're the writer, what are some of the challenges that you've seen during that kind of process?
One of the things I love doing theater is that it's collaborative, because actors can say, hey, that line doesn't make sense to me. And I'll say, okay, it's necessary to get across a piece of information to drive the story forward. How can the line be revised and made better so that it sounds like it belongs in that character's mouth, and also so it advances the story? So during during the rehearsals for Matter of Intent, that happened a lot, and it was a very busy time. At that point, my father had just gone into a nursing home, and I was teaching full time, so I would teach all day. I would go to the nursing home and spend an hour or 2 hours there around dinner each night. I'd get home, eat, and start revising from notes from last night's rehearsal so I could get things printed out, and then go to rehearsal. And it was very busy. I was on a round-the-clock schedule, just running the whole time. But it worked out, and I learned a lot from Lorna Hill and from the other actors, and Phil Nurse, the director. I learned a lot about putting together a theater production.
Hi, Gary. I'm sorry, Dales, did you have something
No,
else?
you're good. I was just going to turn.
Okay, I'm sorry. Do you want to? Oh, maybe you froze up. I'm Chris Wiley. I'm
Hi, Chris.
done a little bit with inclusion and or inclusive rather, and now that we're in a space where other folks know what it's like to kind of be isolated and things like that, you know, things are really changing. We've had a lot of things open up, like things like this Zoom and other things. Even education has moved online and things like that weren't so accessible before. And I don't know if you can tell, but I'm a wheelchair user. I have cerebral palsy, and you know, theater is one of those spaces that isn't always accessible. Just before you came on with Amy, we were having conversation about trying to find a space to do a show whenever we're able to go back out and do shows, which is to be determined, I suppose. But that's always a challenge because of accessibility. So now we have this world where people kind of see something that maybe they haven't seen before. How do we keep that momentum going, do you think, in you know, to make sure that more people are involved, get more people involved that might have been on the outside, you know, things like that. Any thoughts there?
I think it's worthwhile when people get involved in theater for them to see the range of jobs that are associated with theater, because there are so many things that have to be done, not just acting, directing, and writing. There's lighting, costumes, set design. There's so many things that, and I've learned from lots of people who can do lots of things with theater. I think the more people who get involved with theater, discovering the behind the scenes kinds of things, will have a natural affinity toward the holistic process eventually. And therefore, inclusion might be a little easier in the sense that the person knows all the things that need to be done, and will do what he or she is best able to do in the given circumstance.
Right.
Okay, it's another call, I guess. Is that what that is? Yeah. Do you have a Colleen in your group?
Yes.
Okay, all right. I see a Colleen here, and I don't see a picture. And I just wondered, I have a daughter named Colleen. I just wondered if she was trying to call. She lives in Pennsylvania. Okay. Actually, and that daughter is on the spectrum. And when I created the maid character who was charged with murder and Matter of Intent, I modeled her after my daughter. My daughter is on the spectrum, but I made the maid. I gave her some of the same characteristics, but I didn't offer any particular explanation. It was 1960 and things weren't clear. The only thing that somebody said was that her mother drank a lot when she was pregnant, and fetal alcohol syndrome hadn't been identified yet. So I had to be careful time-wise. But I wanted to make someone who who by being different would end up, I don't want to say victimized, but presumed guilty given the circumstances. And so my second play actually dealt a little bit with inclusion, but it didn't deal with the broad spectrum of inclusion in terms of the whole company and all the things that need to be done.
Right.
And I think that's a wonderful way to get involved, because when you have a company, you have people doing things, like the Lord Chamberlain's Men, Shakespeare's company. Everybody did something different, but they all rotated what they were doing because so much needed to be done. And I think that's a wonderful way for inclusion, because then things come up. Hi, Tammy. Then things come up, and you see who can do what, and everyone's participation then becomes key, integral, valued, and validated.
Yeah. Thanks.
Oh, you're welcome.
So,
Anybody else? Go ahead. I have the list of questions you sent.
I was going to ask, so you wrote an amazing play, Splitwit, which will be staged by Inclusive Theater of West New York when we can get back to our physical performances. What inspired you to write this particular play?
Well, if you see Tammy's picture, and now on my computer it's in the lower left corner, Tammy's my better half. We were in the car together on a trip, and we were listening to something, to a podcast, and they were talking about split brain syndrome. And now Tammy's probably one of 4 or 5 people on earth, including a couple of my kids and a couple of my siblings, who can look at my face and say, uh-oh, he's making up a story. And I'm doing something else, like driving or eating a meal or what have you. There's a little switch that flips, and the switch flipped on that. So, well, if the brain is split and the two halves function separately and they can't communicate with each other, how could a witness to a murder? All right, I'm a mystery writer, okay? So I think in terms of murder for what I'm doing. So how could a witness communicate what he knew about a murder? And so that happened in the car on a trip. Honey, do you remember where we were? No, I can't remember where we were either, but we were driving back from somewhere. And so I started doing research on split brain syndrome and started thinking of the logic, how it would work. So I read tons of articles, and I studied lots of anatomy charts, and I just went through it again and again. And the tricky thing about that play was making sure in stage directions that the character with that particular syndrome is using the right hand or the left hand appropriately given what's there. That was the toughest part of writing that. But I like to write mysteries, and I like to take my reader or viewer or watcher along on a journey and then surprise them at the end.
Now I have even more witnesses here in case anything ever happens to me.
Okay, nothing's going to happen to you, baby. Don't worry about it. So that's how Split. I'm looking forward to seeing what you do with Splitwit, and I will stay out of the way. If you think lines don't work, certainly tell me that, and I can work on lines and change things as needed. But I don't plan to kibitz at all. I try to not do that. Once you decide to do a play, I decide to let go and let you do it without getting in the way. So I don't know if that's a relief or not. But.
That sort of goes into my next question. So how do you feel about non-traditional persons acting in acting roles? For example, gender swapping of characters or a disabled person in a role?
I think it's wonderful. I think it's absolutely wonderful. It gives somebody a chance to do something else. When I was younger and did a little acting, I do a little acting now, But when I was much younger, I did more. I used to think I would love to do Hamlet. And of course, that possibility never opened up. And I spent most of my time writing and then raising kids and other things, so I never got to do that. And it's not a regret, but I would have loved a shot at doing Hamlet.
Do it with inclusive
frankly-
theater.
Pardon?
You can do it with
Pardon?
inclusive theater.
Well, I'm actually a little old for Hamlet at this point. I should probably do Claudius.
Peace,
But that
whoever
would
you
be-
want.
And I think non-traditional casting, I think, is wonderful. I would love to have a shot at as an actor when I was younger, and even now, if somebody were foolish enough to offer me Batman or James Bond, I would break my arm signing the contract and taking it. So there's no. Listen, well, he's almost 70 years old. He's not James Bond. Give him a chance. He might pull it off. But I think it's wonderful. What did I read recently? I forget what it was, but it was a case where you had two actors who swapped the roles back and forth. And I've seen those things done before or heard of those being done before. And I forget what this was, but both actors, and there was a hero villain set up, and both actors swapped the parts back and forth, and they both were perfect for it. I thought, yeah, I would love to do something like that too, and that's non-traditional. So yeah, I think it's great if you can get some casting in there, because the quality of the acting shouldn't matter, or shouldn't. The characteristics of the actor shouldn't matter if the quality of the acting is strong.
I think that non-traditional actor can sort of put a new journey to the story. Like you were saying, like
Yes.
you like take your readers on a journey. So like in theater, what you see on stage is kind of what you see in your head. So if it's a different character playing that role, it's kind of a different journey or a different perspective, and that definitely can make it a little bit more intriguing then.
Well, I think that happens a lot when you cast somebody, and I got lucky with Matter of Intent, because when I was writing it, in my head I saw Lorna Hill playing the attorney, and when Lorna read the play and said they wanted to do it, she said, "I'll play the attorney," and I thought, that's kind of what I was hoping for. So that was close to beginner's luck in that sense. But I've had other people come along and do parts, and I wouldn't have cast that person in my head, but once they did it, it was like, oh, that's interesting, because you can take a line. One of the wonderful things about DVDs is watching some of the either deleted scenes or the other versions of scenes, because when you see those, you see the variety of approaches that can be done that depend on the actor and the versatility of the actor and the actor's delivery. In The Runaway Jury, there's a scene where it was written after the movie was cast, because Dustin Hoffman and Gene Hackman had been roommates when they were young, struggling actors, and they had never been in a film together. And in that film, they had no scenes together. So the screenplay author wrote a scene for them where Hoffman encounters Hackman's character in the restroom. And Hoffman was a crusading liberal attorney, and Hackman's character was a jury consultant who tried to control the outcome of the trial. And so they're on opposite sides. And there was a scene where Hoffman confronts Hackman in the restroom and basically says, "It's because of people like you that the justice system is screwed up. It can't do this, it can't do that." And Hackman's character had to give a line that went, "I don't give a shit." And he did it, and you see on the DVD, on the special features, he went, "I don't give a shit. I don't give a shit. I don't give a shit. I don't give a shit." And the one that ended up in the movie, "I don't give a shit," which was completely different, because they experimented with all those. And I think that's one of those things that you find when the actor gets in and he does well, the actor takes the role and does something with it. You have a way as a writer of thinking this line should be delivered this way. And sometimes an actor will surprise you. And I try to stay out of the way when somebody else is directing a play of mine. If I direct a play of mine, I'll say, I want you to do blank with this line, but if somebody else is directing it, I'll stay out of the way and let that happen. When Kurt Schneiderman did a wonderful job directing the trial of Trayvon Martin, there were lots of surprises in the staging and the performance there that were not the way I had written it. And it's not that they changed the lines. It sounded different when I saw them from the way it sounded in my head when I wrote it, but the way it worked was beautiful. And there was one especially where I had the two lawyers giving summations, and I had one and the other in the script. And Kurt had the brilliant idea to break them up so that they're doing the summations simultaneously, and your attention is shifting back and forth from one to the other. And it was so effective that when before the play was published, I changed the scene in the play to fit the way it had been done.
Do you find that it happens often, or is it sometimes just what happens sometimes?
Well, most of my plays have been done in Buffalo, and I've seen a couple different productions of a couple different plays, and I've liked some of the things they've done, particularly if it's in another city. For example, Scavenger's Daughter, which was first done in a stage reading in Urban Stages in New York, and then it was done here at Ujima, and then last year it was done in Rochester by a different theater company, and everything was different. Everybody was different. The nature of each performance was different. Or the nature of each run, rather, so that it was the same play. And some lines were exactly as I thought they'd be delivered, and some lines surprised me. I have one play that has never been done in Buffalo. It's been done, it had its world premiere in Knoxville. I'm sorry, yes, the Tennessee Stage Company, Knoxville. It's been done in England a couple times. It was done in India in English, and later in Hindi. It's never been done in Buffalo. It's a Dorian Gray style murder mystery called Picture Perfect, and I've seen clips from what people did in other places, and it's like, oh, that's interesting. That's really interesting. So. Recently, I had a short play based on a short story that I had published many, many years ago. I had a story in an anthology called The Shadow's Imprint, which was about death. And the short story was called A Simple Game of Death. And in the story, a professor has a terrible dream that sends him downstairs to his game room. And in the dream, his son, who's away at college, had been killed in an accident. And I had a dream that my son, who was serving in Iraq at the time, had been killed. And I got up and had this really bizarre night. I couldn't go back to sleep. Now, my son is alive and well. He did 3 combat tours. He got through them wounded, but fine. So I wrote that story because of the pressure that I was feeling about his being there. I mean, I didn't sleep well for those 3 tours. So recently, Springville Center for the Arts did the play version of that. It was first done in Florida a number of years ago. I didn't see that production, but they did, at Springville Center for the Arts, they did it. And they changed, now the way the casting was, in the story, the professor was a man, death was a man. When I wrote the play, I wrote death as a woman because I wanted to change it up a little. And when they did it in Springville, they made both of them women, and it worked beautifully. And they said, were you okay with that? I said, oh, sure, that was fine. I thought it worked very well.
Christian, did you have something?
Yeah, I had to unmute there. Hey, Gary, Chris Wiley again.
Yes.
It's interesting that you talk about different ways of doing lines and things like that. That's something that I find fascinating as well, the kind of the, you know, the outtakes and the things like that. And it made me think of something that happened with us in Inclusive when we did Shakespeare. There was a day that Janelle and I couldn't be there, so we had somebody else step into the role, and Amy knew ahead of time. So this was sort of planned. But the person who filled in or took over that night did the role completely different from me, which is exactly what you're talking about. Now,
Right.
this is sort of a follow-up to my previous question, because theater's not necessarily so inclusive all the time, and especially some of us haven't had the opportunity to get in like other companies and things like that, or in accessibility or those kind of things. How do you think we begin to break down some of those walls so that then they get to see, other than if people come to see us in Inclusive, how do we continue to break down those walls in some other ways so that people can see, well, hey, I would have never thought Chris is a wheelchair user, or somebody else, say on the spectrum or something like that, or for any other reason, that they do the job, they do the role maybe a little bit different, but really well in their own way. So
Sure.
Any thoughts there? How to break down those walls?
Well, I think one of the ways to break them down is theater design, because there are some theaters now, like how Ujima is situated now, I would think would make it easier for, say, someone in a chair to make exits and entrances with less complications.
Sure.
By contrast, I've been in a couple of plays at New Phoenix Theater, and Richard, I love working at New Phoenix. Richard does wonderful things. He has the seats are movable so that sometimes the audience will be on the stage, and the action will be in the center, almost theater and around, and sometimes it's the traditional use of the stage. But one of the issues when I was in Inherit the Wind there, and again, that was non-traditional casting, because Inherit the Wind imagined a southern town fighting against evolution. And I played one of the lesser attorneys. And you would not have thought in 1924-25 that a southern town would have any black people in a position like that. But we had several black members of the cast because it was non-traditional. But anyway, one of the issues with that theater is if you have an entrance that's at the back of the theater and an exit, and then your next entrance is on the stage, you've got to go upstairs, run across the upstairs section of the theater, go down the back stairs, and come over. And that makes it difficult for someone in your situation to do that entrance. So I think theater design, is a big area where change could be made.
Thanks. Janelle,
Yeah. Hi, I'm Janelle, Chris's wife.
I know.
Thank you for sharing. This has been very informative. One question that comes to my mind just listening to you is, I know you said that you wrote stories to start with, and then you've taken to writing plays. What is your process of going from writing a story and turning it into a play, or like you said, watching a movie and turning it into a play? What is that process like?
It's part of the process is I'll get an idea, and if I were a member of the Looney Tunes cast, the idea would be a light bulb over my head, and then I would have to think, what should this be? Should it be a play, a short story, or a novel? And I love telling stories. The one thing I haven't done yet is write and sell a graphic novel and write and tell a screenplay. I've stage plays, novels, short stories, and I'm not getting rich on any of it, so I feel I want to do a graphic novel at some point, and I want to do a screenplay at some point. But I think, where would this story fit? Where can it be best expressed? Matter of intent. I thought play, but I don't have any experience writing plays, so let me try this as a short story or a novel. It didn't work. I tried and I couldn't make it work. When I got going for a play, it worked just fine. And so that's, if I find the right venue for the story I want to tell, it's easier for me to tell it, rather than try to squeeze the wrong story into something that doesn't fit. I taught a writing workshop many years ago, and there was a man in the workshop named JJ, lovely guy. He wrote a short story that was 16 pages long, I think, and had 25 characters. And it's like, whoa, wait, too much. You can't develop anybody with that. You put this group into the wrong venue, and most of the time, most theater companies now want, they say, no more than 5 characters. And most of my plays have 6 characters because I can do a balance there in terms of gender and other things. I can do a balance. But it's hard, and the old-fashioned way, like Inherit the Wind, something like 23 characters in that play. Some of them are on screen or on stage for 1 or 2 lines, because that's the way they used to do theater. But now people don't want to pay actors, so they say, well, you can only have 5 characters, 6 characters. And if you decide something is a play, you have to start thinking, who's going to do the play, and will it work with this number of characters? And if you find you have too many people and the story is too complicated, then it's a novel. It's not a play. And that, because it would have been a play 50 years ago, but things have changed at this point. And getting people to read your stuff is hard enough without violating all the principles they say. So I decide where the story should go, what it should be, short story, novel, or play. And then I start working. And it doesn't always work out. I'm sitting at my desk right now, and even though I've cleaned them out, and in fact, they're now all on digital files, for many years I had drawers full of unfinished stories, unfinished novels, unfinished plays, things that just didn't work out, because sometimes it happens like that.
Hello, Gary Ross. It's me, Avery Gill. Nice to meet you.
Hi, Avery. Good
So
to meet you.
I got 2 questions. How many years experience have you been a writer, and what location you was born and raised?
I was born here in Buffalo, grew up on the east side of Buffalo. The first library I went to was the North Jefferson Library at Utica and Jefferson. That's where I found the Ray Bradbury book. And I have been writing for, I told you when I started, right?
Yeah, how many years you've been?
Yeah, I've been writing for 58 years.
58 years, huh?
I started when I was 10. I'll be 69 my next birthday.
Oh, okay. That's cool, though. So what is gonna be the next writing prompt you're gonna be doing, Gary?
Well, Inclusive has Split Wit. I'm delighted that you want to do it. New Phoenix has Stoker's Guest, and they want to do that next season. I'm delighted they want to do that. So right now, recently the second Gideon Rhymes mystery was published, Nickel City Crossfire. The publisher has the third book, Nickel City Storm Warning, and so I need to start working on the 4th book, which is Nickel City Naked Lady. Okay, and before everybody laughs, a naked lady is a type of saxophone. It's also a poisonous plant, and the story will also involve revenge porn. So usually my titles have double entendre. Nickel City Blues was about a blues singer who was being stalked by her ex-boyfriend, who was a cop, and my detective was hired to bodyguard her. So there was a double entendre with that title. And Nickel City Crossfire out now, same thing. There's a double entendre, or my French professor would say double entendre. So, but Nickel City Naked Lady will have a triple entendre. So I have to do research on it. I have to do the research on that particular thing with saxophones. A dear friend of mine who passed away about a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago, had been a saxophone and clarinetist. He's been a saxophonist and clarinetist. And I was visiting one day, and he and his wife were like big brother and big sister to me for years. And he said, "Hey, I want to show you my naked lady." What? And his wife started laughing. And we went upstairs to his study, and he showed me this it was beautiful saxophone. And he said, "That's a naked lady." And of course, the wheel started turning. I can do something with that. And here, years later, I'm going to be turning it into a novel. So I've got to do research on the naked lady, and then also on the poisonous plant I discovered, because, hey, if I found a poisonous plant, somebody's going to die. That's just the way it works out. So that's my next project. I'm tinkering with a couple short stories. I published one Gideon Rhyme short story last year, and I have another one that's out at magazines now. And eventually I hope to have a collection of Gideon Rhyme short stories. So, but my next project will be that novel, and I don't know yet when I'll write another play.
Any plans for more poetry? I know you've written poetry before. So
I have. I'm not very good at it. I'm not very good at poetry. Because I think in terms of story, and poetry frequently thinks in terms of image. And I think I have to have an emotional connection with image. Probably the best poem I ever wrote was one I wrote after my mother's funeral. And I had a line, "Your rose-colored coffin carried my lip print into the earth." And I thought that was a lovely line. But generally, when I think of stuff to write, I think in terms of stories. Poems kind of turn into stories.
Mm-hmm.
Quentin, did you have something? Did he freeze on me?
His lips are moving?
Oh, you're muted.
Okay.
Hello. I just
Hi.
want to know, what was your biggest writing influence as a writer? Like, who do you take inspiration from?
How long have you got? I mean, seriously. I read an awful lot, and I have since I was a kid. So I fell in love with writers, various writers, early on. Ray Bradbury wrote poetry that was disguised as prose. Agatha Christie, John A. Williams, Khalil Gibran. These are people I read when I was young, and I started branching out and reading other people. My more recent influences, last 23 years, Robert B. Parker, wonderful, wonderful private eye novelist. Joyce Carol Oates, been reading Joyce Carol Oates since I was in college. And then a lot of classics, Twain, James Baldwin, Richard Wright. My creative writing professor, Carleen Hatcher Polite, who, when I was in class with her as an undergraduate, said, "The only people who get an A in this class are people I think should be writing for a living." I was, 18, 19. I was determined to get an A, because if I didn't, that meant I was on the wrong path. So those were all influences. Toni Morrison. There are so many. And I can't leave out Bob Kane, Stan Lee, or Ian Fleming. Those were all influences. I've recently read a couple James Bond continuation novels by Anthony Horowitz. And what I love about Horowitz and Trigger Mortis and Forever and a Day, this guy writes like Ian Fleming, which most continuation novelists do. So those are all influences for me. People whom I read a lot when I was growing up, and I learned plotting, and I learned vocabulary, and I learned character development just by reading. Also, and this is for the playwrights in the group, Tennessee Williams. I started reading Tennessee Williams when I was 11, and I've read almost all his plays. Even when I didn't understand them, I understood something about them. So again, North Jefferson Library, they had a whole section of Tennessee Williams plays, and his standard set designer was Joel Nielsinger, because the original set design was in each volume. And I read Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, Summer and Smoke, and Camino Real, and you name it.
Patty, did you have something?
Hi, Gary?
Yes.
Yeah, my name is Patty. I've been with Inclusive for about a little over a year now.
Okay, you don't have a picture up, is that okay?
I do not.
Okay, all
sorry,
right.
I'm one of those, I guess, oldie people who still have desktops.
I just wanted to look at the right face, and nobody.
Oh, no, I'm the number. I'm the number on there. I'm the phone number that you're calling from. So it's going to say phone number 716. Yeah, okay. All right. Well, like I said, I've been in with Inclusive for a little over a year now, and I'm quite impressed with how people can bring to the table so many different personas when dealing with plays. And this is like a two-part question. Number one, when you are writing a play and you have a set, character in mind, when you see a person portraying what they're bringing to the table, does that change the story any? And do you like, yes, I want that, or do you like to stick with what you want the story to go? Because I think somebody mentioned, I think it was Chris mentioned, how they bring to the table something, a different character, and it doesn't change the play, but it changes the perception.
Yes, it does all the time, and that's something I can even tell you a story of how that worked. And I told you earlier how Kurt had chopped up the summations in the trial of Trayvon Martin and interlaced them, and then maybe changed the script before it was published. My play before that was The Mark of Cain, which I was planning to direct, but then the actor who was going to play Dr. Cain took ill and subsequently passed away, B. Perry. And I thought, I need to find another black actor who can pass for late middle age and who can get a massive number of lines, or I can take the part and find a director. So I decided to take the part, and I found another director. And Akira Roberts, who played my character's daughter, in the stage directions, she is about to reveal something that is going to be a surprise. And she says, "But Papa," and he says, "Nope," holds up his hand to stop her. When we were in our first rehearsal together, she grabbed me and held on to me like a desperate daughter. And I have two daughters. I know what a desperate daughter feels like. And she did it so well, I changed the stage direction because, wow, she took that someplace I didn't expect, but it worked beautifully. So yes, the actor can influence how it comes out. And it's not just me that happens to, because writers have visions of how their characters should be. And I grew up reading a lot of James Bond. I just know this. Ian Fleming had an idea in his head that James Bond looked like Hoagie Carmichael. Now, if you don't know who Hoagie Carmichael was, he was a musician and an actor. Google him and look at his picture. Think, that's James Bond? When Albert R. Broccoli and Harry Saltzman hired Sean Connery to be Bond, Fleming was incensed. That Scottish accent. He looks like a truck driver, which he had been. He doesn't look like James Bond. But by the time Connery took the role and owned it, okay, Dr. No was 1962. Fleming died in 1964. His second last novel, You Only Live Twice, had an obituary for James Bond who was missing. Because of Connery's performance, Fleming changed Bond's background from English to Scottish father and Swiss mother because of that performance. Only because of the performance that Connery did. Because he won over the creator. He said, you know what? That's it. That's it. So that happens. A writer has one vision, and a good actor can change that vision, and the writer will say, wow, he's right. That's it.
So as a director, you feel
Mm-hmm.
that a director should be open to welcoming different personas
Yes.
instead of sticking with, okay. Okay. And my second part is...
It's a collaboration. And a good actor will say,
I love it.
Yeah.
I love where things... And my second part is, because of inclusive, and I used to write poetry. In fact, I still write poetry. Well, it's been a while, but I used to write it, and I found a collection that I finally dusted off. But due to inclusive and their absolute just wonderfulness in bringing to the table so many different, I found it in myself to want to write. And I want to write in fact, Quentin is the one that actually inspired me the most with this.
Okay.
To write a one-act persona about a personal thing that's something personal with me, but I'm having a mental block, what I call writer's block, in starting this. And I will conclude my questions with, how do you get around that when you're trying to start the process to go ahead and, because the writing is there, I want to get this out, but it's just getting by that block. So I'm just going to go end with that. And thank you so much for speaking. I appreciate it.
You are most welcome, and I will address that because, gee, I happen to be in the middle of a writer's block myself. Looking at the same four walls day after day is getting to me, frankly. I finished Split Wit at the start of this, and I wrote a short story. And I started another short story, and I've just run into a wall, and it's hard to get the motivation. But I know I will get through it. I have to. But when you are doing something that is based on reality, one of the things that is hard to do is not tell the story the way it happened. And I always say you've got to change it from the real life inspiration to something else. Because when you change it, you give yourself a place to go. If you're trying to adhere, if you're writing an autobiography, well, you have to adhere to it. But if you're doing something that gives you some freedom, and you can fictionalize it a little to dramatize it, and I'll give you a good example. Shara Thompson, and I can't think of her co-author's name, but Shara was in a writing workshop I did for Just Puzzle for years. And she and her ex-boyfriend from college together wrote a novel about a hitchhiking trip they took. And she would bring sections to the workshop and talk about things, talked about their dog and the dog they had on the trip and so forth and so on. And she said, we just seem to be stalled. And I said, kill the dog. She said, we can't kill the dog. He didn't die. I said, you're writing a novel, which means it's made up. If you kill the dog, you will give yourself someplace to go. And you know what? She killed the dog. They finished the book. And it's sold. You change some aspect of it so you're not locked into telling the story as it happened, because real life doesn't always follow a story arc. A story arc is basically like this. You start with can you see that? I'll pull back a little, or the light kind of washes it out, even though I used the Sharpie. You start with a teaser or a hook at the beginning, and then a rising action to the climax. And then you may or may not have a denouement that explains things with the climax. So, can you all hear me still?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because I just got a note that said unmute yourself. Because what happens is that if you stick to telling the story as it happened, you don't follow story structure. story structure is very much like a video game. How many of you played a video game to the end? If you played a video game to the end, I see it. Dallas, you're smiling. You've done it, right? It gets harder as you go. Then there's the boss character at the end that takes a lot to defeat, destroy, best, the last hardest puzzle to solve. That follows story structure. And so if you're not following story structure, but you're doing it as a story, sometimes you get lost. So you do have to keep that in mind. You're following the story arc, you know. And speaking of Sean Connery, you may remember in The Untouchables, you'll have to do it the Chicago way. They put one of yours in the hospital, you put one of theirs in the morgue. No, they come at you with a knife, you come at them with a gun. They put one of yours in the hospital, you put one of theirs in the morgue. And notice the action goes up as you do it. That's the rising action. That's the Chicago way.
So we can end on this. And again, thank you very much for spending time with us and sharing your insight and just everything and just being here with us, especially during these times.
Oh, wow.
So we definitely appreciate it.
The time flew. You are most welcome. The time flew. I didn't realize it was this late.
So if we can sneak in one more really quickly here, where do you see yourself in your role in terms of inclusion? Where do you see your role in that?
I try to get a variety of types of people in my stories. And I do that because I hope that what they are is reflective of the broad swath of humanity. We can't be a human race unless we include all aspects of the human race. And I try to, you know, I've tried to use multicultural situations in my stories. I've used gay characters. I've used characters who had what might be called disabilities or differently abled characters at different points, because everybody is part of the family. And so when I look at that, I start writing and think about not whether I want to include somebody who does blank. It becomes necessary. Now, if you've read Splitwit, it deals, and I'm not going to say much because somebody watches this. I don't want them to get one of the surprises in the play. But it doesn't deal with just one quote unquote syndrome or condition or disorder. It deals with a second one, as you well know. But that one comes out later. That's a surprise that generally people don't know about. And so I try to get all that down. In fact, I read a letter in the paper the other day, one of those was to Ann Landers, one of the advice columnists, about somebody who suffered from this particular traumatic brain injury that is covered. And that's something that people generally don't think about, but that's one of the manifestations. And so that's one of those things. I try to include everybody because everybody, I say to people frequently, everybody deserves a place at the table, no matter what.
And that's definitely our mission here at iTownie. So thank you again for joining us tonight in our Saturday night sessions. We absolutely appreciate it and your insight. Next week, we will have Christina Abbott join us. So
okay.
With that, Amy.
I am here. Thank you so much, Gary. That was awesome. Like totally inspired. This is great. Maybe my block will now go. I was telling Kat, like I've wanted to write forever, and it's just now, you know, with the plague, oh, I'm gonna do it, and it just locks down. So, but you've given a lot of things to think about. I mean, we usually have a writing group at Inclusive, and we talked about maybe bringing that back during this time to help us get back. And because oftentimes, just like people having a place at the table, we also want our voices heard and not someone else telling our stories.
Right, absolutely.
So hopefully that
one of the things, if you do, whenever we're back in anything that resembles normality, and you like hold a writers group meeting, I'm more than happy to come talk and listen to people and make suggestions for things, because one of the things I learned along the way was how to make it work if you're approaching something else, if you're trying to sell, you're trying to get your work out there. Over the years, I've developed, I think, enough experience to say you might want to think about killing the dog, for example. You might want to do something this way to make the piece work another way. And one of the problems with writing is that we tend to think we do it well, and I can't judge whether I do it well. I mean, it might sound good, and then I listen to other people, and they say, "Well, I don't like that. That doesn't make," and and I listen selectively. Some people I listen, "Oh yeah, that makes sense to me," and other things don't. But I did look at a book that somebody wrote once, and I said, "The way you're approaching this doesn't make this an interesting read. You need to follow story structure." For example, his was kind of flat, kind of level. And he said, "My father liked it." I said, "Your father has a vested interest in your emotions. I don't. I'm trying to tell you how to write a better book. I'm not trying to tell you something to make you feel good."
Yeah, and we have some, I mean, Avery, is a great rapper, so he writes differently on different things, but Quentin writes really great plays, and Dallas is an amazing poet. Chris and Janelle write great stories. I mean, we just have this kind of plethora of writing types, but it would be nice, especially from that perspective, to have you come in and talk to some folks, because one of the challenges we found in writing group, it's really hard to tell someone that when they have autism. I had a gentleman that was there who refused to edit his work, and he would get so pissed off. And then one day he just threw it at me and told me to do it. And I said, "Look, if you want it staged, you're going to fix it." And that was what it finally took. I know Marilyn was there for that. We run into some challenges, but this idea that, mom is vested in your work, we are too, as people supporting you, but we're going to be real about it.
Yeah, sure. Well, I was told by a local director who's remained nameless, whose work I respect, that a play I gave him was not a good play. I haven't marketed the play since. I pulled it back. I have to fix it if I can fix it. If not, I'm not going to worry about it. But it made sense to me that he looks at it differently from me. That's an issue that you frequently find with people, and they've got to be, writing is hard. It's hard to hear people say, "Well, this doesn't work." And the way I always approach it in workshops is to say, "It would be stronger if," because that puts the critique on a positive trajectory, rather than say, "Oh, this sucks." No, you don't say that. It would be stronger if you did blank, if you chose a different word, if you cut the number of characters, if you shortened the scene, if you lengthened the scene. It would be better if. And I think people tend to listen to that. So I taught English for 40 years, and that's the way I approach my teaching. So, but I don't want to keep you guys on. This has been fun.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, it goes so fast. And I just want to kudos to Dallas, who has remained calm and cool and collected. However, he looks up to you so much. This was something that he has just been so excited about, that he's chill, but he's on the inside, I know, freaking out.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much. This has been fun.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gary.
Please forgive my messy apartment back there.
It's beautiful. Be safe and well. And
everyone
this will be up
safe.
Shortly. Yes.
Okay. Have a good night, everybody.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you. Same to you, Gary. Peace out.
You're most welcome. Take care.